Nurse in Boston had a near fatal accident. She had worked a grueling shift, and in the parking lot, she pushed the gas and went over the corridor. When is enough enough? Nothing will change until we realize what we are truly sacrificing. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Nurse Boss Ship. It's your girl, Dr. Kiiyonna Jones. And today it is me, yours truly, who will be hosting this podcast as we discuss a very, very, very important topic. As you guys already know, Crystal and I are exploring having separate segments that really hone into our level of expertise, our specialty within the whole nurse boss shift space. My segment is Nursepreneur Mindset Shift with Dr. Jones. And we are going to really dive deep and talk about a new recent issue that made national news that is probably not really new to most of you who are listening, which has to do with exhaustion. And I don't know if you have heard of what happened recently, but there was a nurse in Boston who had a near fatal accident. She had worked a grueling shift, and basically she was in the parking lot and she pushed the gas and went over the corridor of the parking structure. So, the question that I have for you today and how this kind of pertains to mindset shift is, when is enough enough? Do you have that moment where you're like, I know I cannot work another shift, or I cannot work another hour, or I really need to take a PD or personal day? And really think about, how does extreme fatigue affect us as nurses, and what can be done to prevent it? Who is responsible for this? So essentially, what I want you to think about is yourself, and where or when have you had moments when you just knew you had pushed yourself too far, where you realized that you were extremely exhausted? We can explore the broader issue, which is, how does this have a collective impact on us as nurses? So I must say, when I was reading the article about this, I thought, wow, I remember there was a time, and I'll start with you guys with a story. I remember driving on the freeway. Now, I've never been a night shift nurse. Like, when I started nursing, was fortunate. Honestly, I started the unit so I worked for the VA, and they have what they call a critical care department. And the critical care department consists of, at the time, it was ICU, step down, PACU, and ED. And that collectively was the critical care department. So whatever unit you may have been your home unit, you had to rotate to all of the units. And at that time, when I was working at the VA, I was rotating twice a week. So of 3 or 4 of my shifts, depending on if it was my 4-day week or my 3-day week, I was always rotating. So all of them were kind of like home. And if you got to pack you, it was like super chill until it wasn't, right? So if somebody was crashing, then of course it was busy, but on most days you were just recovering and it was great, right? So the unit that was my home unit was PCU, which was step down. And I specifically chose that unit because if I would have selected ICU to be my home unit, I would have had to work nights. And so I knew that I could not work nights. And even though people told me, other nurses when I was graduating, like, oh, you're going to work nights, like you have to work nights, I really never had to work nights, right? So anyway, what happened was there was a period of time where the units were short. and of night shift nurses, and they started that whole mandatory shift. So we had to work once a month a night shift. And let me tell you, working a night shift was no joke for me. And I always knew that it wouldn't be. So I remember one of the night shifts I had worked, plus I had two young kids at the time. So one of the night shifts that I worked, I was on my way home, and many of you may, if you've been to LA, you heard or you know about the 405 freeway, and the traffic is brutal. And I remember I was so tired. I mean, I was so tired that, like, in my heyday, and I used to drink a lot, the feeling that I had was worse than if I had ever, like, was drunk. Like, I felt worse than that trying to drive home. And I remember I called my mom and I was like, Mom, you have to talk to me. Like, I'm so tired. And she was trying to talk to me and she couldn't. I was slurring. I was like, and she's like, you have to pull off the freeway. You are going to get into an accident. And she's like screaming at me, like, do you hear me? Do you hear me? And then she hung the phone up and she called me back, but I had the phone up to my ear and it rang and it startled me. And she's like, get off the freeway now, right? So I got off the freeway. I pulled off. I pulled in like a parking ride that's right off the freeway. And I remember I knocked out. The crazy part about that was I fell asleep with my foot on the brake, my car in drive. And I must have slept for like 2 hours. Think about that. I pulled in to the parking ride and I barely made it. I did not put my car in park. I did not turn my engine off. I left my foot on the brake. I was just that tired. And even now, that was probably 13 years ago, 14 years ago, but I've never forgotten that moment because when I woke up, I was so scared of what could have happened. Not just me possibly getting into an accident, someone, coming into the car, my feet off the brake and ramming it, just anything. It scared the life out of me. And so when I heard the story about what happened at Faulkner Hospital, so just to give you guys a little backstory, on May 17th, this particular nurse at Faulkner Hospital in Boston drove off the top floor, you guys, of a parking garage due to exhaustion. Now think about it. You come off your shift, and I don't know about you guys, but when you work a night shift, generally speaking, those of us who have normal circadian rhythm. Some of you guys are night owls, I know it, but most people sleep at night. So you between the hours of like 2 and 5 is the worst, right? It's when you're like feel like you're losing your mind, you're a little crazy, right? Then you have that last little amount of adrenaline to get your patients ready for the next shift. You get off. Now she gets off her shift, she's in her car, and somehow she presses the gas and she drives off the top floor. Now, here's the thing. Extreme fatigue amongst nurses is not just a personal health issue. It really jeopardizes the nurses, the public, and also patient safety. And so we really have to think about what can we do or what should we do to combat this and whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of our employer? I mean, someone has to take care of patients during the night shift. And what's even more crazy though, when I remember when I worked registry for a few years, it work going to sleep during your personal break was forbidden. Like you would get in trouble if you went to sleep. I just think about that. Even during your own personal time, you could not go to sleep. It makes me think that when we look at things from the big picture, there could be provisions for us. And there should be, especially for night shift nurses. I'm never, even when I work days, like, and I'm grateful for night shift nurses. I always felt like when I come on, like, if you haven't gotten like some of your work done and there are some things and you had a busy night, or you, even if you didn't have a busy night, just the fact that you were there at night and I was able to sleep in, I have a certain level of respect and like grace for night shift nurses because I know just the mere fact that you have to stay up during the night is a challenge within itself. If you're not able to get the work done, most of the work done, or all of the work done, I should say, I'm okay with that. In this article, there was testimony from a lady named Rebecca First, and she's a retired nurse with 40 years of experience. And she's like, listen, this is emotionally and physically working night shifts is mostly emotionally and physically draining. And the thing about it is you hear it time and time again amongst nurses, the challenges with staying awake and then having to in turn get off work and drive wherever you're going. And if you're in places like metropolitan areas like LA, it's even worse because now you're in traffic. So we really have to think about what that looks like for us. Honestly, that is one of the reasons why I became an entrepreneur, because as I started to get older, I was like, listen, I don't want to work all types of hours. I want to be at home with my family. And even when I went into leadership, there were moments where if somebody didn't come in, me as nursing supervisor, if somebody didn't come in, I could not leave the house, meaning the hospital, we call it the house. I couldn't leave what was I going to do? Walk away? If my relief was coming in at 6:30 and they had an emergency or they called off, I had to sit there until I got some relief. Now, the only person above me would be my director, and if they couldn't come in, the CEO, and the CEO is definitely not coming in, right? Or the nurse, sorry, the CNE, the nurse executive was definitely not coming in. So there were moments where I was at work from 6 in the morning all the way till 3, 4 the next morning. And the only reason why I was able to leave at 3, 4 the next morning was because my relief, the 6 a.m. shift relief came in a couple of hours early for me so I could leave. So those moments for me, like, leaving those times of night, working 16, 18 hours, that I wasn't a part of my plan, is why I felt so compelled also to start my own business, because I wanted that time freedom that I just didn't have. And even as much as I tried to convince myself that I had it, the truth of the matter was I did not. So we have to think about, this was the case. These types of shifts, these 12-hour shifts, worked well in a different time. But the truth of the matter is, one thing that's constant is change. Why has this not changed for us? I know nurses like working 12-hour shifts. I understand, because you get 4 days off. But like in this society that we are in, is it necessary? Should there be some type of systemic change in our healthcare policy that needs to happen to ensure safe work conditions for nurses? Should they possibly split up the hours? Should there be longer breaks for night shift nurses where they get at least a couple of hours where they are able to sleep? Should we take a look at the working conditions so that ultimately we can ensure that our patients have better care? I mean, we have to really think about that. When I look at my career as a nurse and the many of times where I was just so exhausted and fatigued, I attribute a lot of it to the system in which I existed, meaning the healthcare system and what they allowed. Now, I worked for some organizations that, you got an hour break at UCLA, and they didn't care if you went to sleep during your hour break. And because you had an hour break and then you had two 15-minute breaks, that meant that you could still have time to eat on those 15-minute breaks. And then you could rest that hour if you chose to, right? So I think we need to really think about the fact that pushing us beyond our limits is a recipe for disaster. And I want you guys, if you could, in the chat, in the comments, like, tell me, what do you think could be some solutions, or, especially as we age in this profession. Now, I know I remember being a younger nurse in my 20s, and like, I didn't work nights, but I definitely could go out and then get home at 3 o'clock, sleep for an hour, shower, get dressed, get ready to go to work. But what about the nurses that have been nurses for 15, 20, 30 years who are working night shifts and really truly just their body is different and really needs adequate rest and adequate staffing levels. So here's my suggestion, and this is just something that I kind of wrote out that I thought, as I was thinking about this and just kind of reflecting over my own career, I just feel like nothing will change until we realize what we are truly sacrificing. Now, this young lady or this lady, she could have lost her life. It was directly related to overall fatigue. And fatigue for us is not just getting off of a night shift being tired. It is working yourself even on the day shift, right? Working yourself, being understaffed, having to lift heavy patients, having to always be in positions where you are either emotionally being taxed, physically being taxed, mentally being taxed as a healthcare professional in your role. It is a lot, you guys. And I don't know about you, but 3 12-hour shifts, although that's great, if we're really being honest, it takes a day and a half to recover from that. And that's if you're working day shift. We're not even going to talk about if you're working nights. So that's my segment, you guys. I would love to know, what you guys think about it. One of the things that I can say is collectively, we can definitely make change. This is not like hey, everybody start a business podcast segment that I'm doing, but it's really to make us really think about what we are sacrificing and compromising. And I know you guys know what I'm talking about with what I'm about to say. If the fact that you can look at someone and tell that they've been a night shift nurse for 15, 20 years, if you can just look at them, and I know you guys know what I'm talking about because they got the night shift nurse look, that there alone lets you know how impactful it is long term on us, and that we should definitely be doing something. So think about what are some practical steps that hospitals can take that can reduce nurse fatigue and lead to a better quality of life for us. Because ultimately, when we do that, our patients benefit. Nursing as a collective is better off with healthy nurses who receive adequate rest and who are compensated appropriately. And that is what I wanted to say about this article and what has happened. So comment what you think below, you guys. As always, don't gatekeep this podcast. I know this was sort of like a mindset shift, but it was definitely one that I felt needed to be addressed because of what's happening in our industry. And I think most importantly, we just need to realize our collective power. In an age right now where we're seeing so many paradigm shifts that's happening in our profession, we really need to be able to show up and speak and also provide solutions for what we think could create a better work environment for us, and in particular for those who are working at the bedside. Until next time, you guys, thanks so much for tuning in. As always, share this podcast with some of your fellow nurse practitioner, and healthcare professionals. As you know, Crystal and I are always thinking about you and wanting to come and add value into your lives and just make your life a little bit better. But until next time, you guys, take care. Bye.